The crop tool in Photoshop is very easy to use, but it's also very versatile because it has many different ways of correcting images. So first of all, this is the crop tool here in the toolbar. You can press C on the keyboard to get it quickly selected. And then once you have the crop tool active, you will see a bounding box around the whole image or the whole canvas. You can drag these corner points around to change the crop. And once you change the crop, you can also click anywhere in the middle to drag the crop rectangle around. There's an option which I prefer to turn off. It's called delete cropped pixels. If you have this turned off, then even if you crop the image, you won't lose all those details outside of the crop rectangle. So if I accept this crop by double clicking on the rectangle, I can go back with the crop tool, click on it again, and I can see that all the outside areas are still available. So if I want to again show those parts of the image, I can. So that's a non-destructive way of cropping your images, and I highly recommend to have it turned off most of the time. In case you want to keep a certain aspect ratio on the crop, you can choose that from here in the drop down. So if I want, let's say, a square format, I can just select that. And while having that selected, I can change my crop without affecting its aspect ratio. I can also choose other options here, let's say 5:7, portrait format, or 4:5, another standard for images. And of course, I can change these values around. So toggle between portrait or landscape version. Or if I want to have a free crop, I can just switch back to WH resolution. That way I can just play around and set the crop to whatever size and aspect ratio I need. Let me just accept this crop and show you another image where I would like to change the crop once again, but I am going to use a very interesting feature, which is actually the crop rectangles overlay. By default, it shows us the thirds of the image. So we can see whenever we change the crop, it automatically shows these lines which are dividing the image into 3 even sides. So we have 3 here and also 3 rectangles below. Now, the rule of thirds is a very common compositional technique, and that's why the crop tool has this feature, because then you can align certain parts of the image to match the rule of thirds rule, which says that the most interesting parts of an image should always be aligned to these thirds in the image. So instead of having the balloon in the middle, I can also decide to have it slightly on the left edge, or maybe closer to the right edge of the frame. And you see what I'm doing, that I'm using one of the horizontal thirds for the horizon, and then I align the balloon on also one of the vertical thirds. So that can work as a different composition, but I'm going to include the mountains in the background, so I prefer to have the balloon here on the left side, something like that. And it doesn't have to be always exactly aligned, maybe slightly further down, something like that. If I press enter or return, I cropped the image based on the rule of thirds. Of course, if you prefer different overlays, you can choose different ones as well. So this is where you can change from rule of thirds to grid or triangle or golden spiral, golden ratio. You can even use the shortcut O while you are using the crop tool to toggle through all these different compositional techniques. Now let me show you another example, because the crop tool can actually be used not only to reduce the canvas area, but also to increase it. So if I zoom out a bit from this image by using the Command- shortcut or Control- on PC, I can now extend the canvas area by dragging the corner points further out. And you see Photoshop by default will create this white background because I have the background color set to white, which is here in the toolbar. And also this feature works mainly when you have the delete crop pixels turned back on. If you don't have that turned on, then Photoshop will just create empty pixels there. So it will have active area, but without having any color information. It will just have it transparent. And this is how Photoshop shows you transparency with these gray and white blocks. So if I press enter, now I manage to increase the canvas size. Of course, there's a better way of doing this if you want to be a bit more precise. So I'm just going to undo this last tab and go to Image, Canvas Size. So let's say you know that you need 50 pixels on all the edges because you want to have like a wide frame or border around the image. Instead of using the original pixel size, I'm going to turn on Relative. That way I can type in 100 and 100 for both the width and height. And if the anchor is set in the middle, that means the image will grow in every direction with the same amount. So it will split these numbers between left and right and top and bottom. So it will increase 50, 50, 50, 50. And the extension color I can choose, let's say I want it white. So now if I click OK, you will see that's a nice 50 pixel stroke around the original image. And let me just show you, if I wanted to have a little bit more space at the bottom, I can go back and say canvas size. But instead of extending in all directions, I only want to extend to the bottom edge. And if I add for the height, let's say 200 pixels, that will be added only at the bottom. And we created a Polaroid effect very quickly, just by using the canvas size option. You can also use the crop tool to straighten images. Let me show you that in this example. Well, there's a lot of problems with this image. Not only the photograph itself is not straight, but also this water tower needs some straightening. That is something also you can do in Photoshop. You can retouch the tower and straighten it. But for now, all I want is to straighten the actual photograph. So all you need is the crop tool. And then here on the options bar, you have the straighten tool, which once you select, you can then define the horizon by click and dragging over it. You don't have to cover the whole horizon. It's enough if you just cover a part of it. So anything that you know is supposed to be straight, you can draw a line over it. And once you let go, it will straighten. And obviously, it will rotate the whole image and automatically crop it to make sure that you see everything within the image and you won't have any transparent pixels. So if I press return, there's my updated image. So this was before and this is after. I'm just pressing my custom shortcuts F1 and F2 to go back and forth, but you can also use Command Z to step back one step at a time. So Command Z will go back one step and one step forward, back and forth, back and forth. And of course, if I would use the straighten tool on the tower itself, so I could use maybe this long vertical pole in the middle as a reference point, then Photoshop would be able to straighten that point of the image. So that way we will have the water tower straight, but all the rest of the image is going to be on an angle. So you can use vertical lines or horizontal lines, whatever you are sure that was originally straight on the image. Let me switch back to the other image we had and show you an alternative version of the crop tool called Perspective Crop Tool, with which you can select an area, let's say this window frame we want to use, but without all the surrounding details. So instead of using the normal crop tool and trying to crop that out of the image, you will find that hard because it's on an angle and it's in perspective as well. So instead of using this tool, I'm going to use the Perspective Crop Tool. I just switch to Perspective Crop Tool, and with this, I'm just going to zoom slightly closer as well. With this, all I need to do is to click on the four corners of this area, defining a plane that I'm going to use. And then once I press return, Photoshop will not only crop but also remove the perspective distortion on this part of the image. This feature is great if you want to save textures from different parts of images, or even if you took a picture of a painting but it was on an angle, you can always get rid of that perspective distortion and have it completely straight facing you. So now that we are familiar with cropping, it is time to talk about probably one of the most important features of Photoshop, and that is the layers panel. So that's what I'm going to show you in the next video.